All righty, I am here with Tanya. I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name. I did before this podcast. She's from Russia. I'll give her a chance to... Can you just tell everybody what's your last name?
Lukyanova.
Lukyanova. Is there a V at the end of it?
There is, yes. And Andy, you did a great job pronouncing it when you tried it out. I'm just going to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You're from Russia. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about a piece that you did or a video that I saw on the Free Press YouTube about this story coming out of Israel and the war. But first, I literally don't know if I've talked to any Russians in my life before. Now, you live in the United States, you live in New York, but you travel to Russia, you grew up in Russia. And the first question I asked you off camera was, is Moscow as good as Tucker Carlson says it is? Is it? Can you give kind of
Tucker Carlson's version of Moscow is sort of a radically incomplete, is the way I would put it. It's not that he is lying about any of it. It's simply that it's missing a lot of the things, right. As I mentioned before we started rolling, how, if you just go as a foreigner to Moscow downtown, you will be impressed by what you see. But travel a few miles outside of city center and you will see a completely different reality. And I think with Tucker, there is definitely a lack of interest or desire to explore those parts of Russia, not to mention probing things like freedom of speech or freedom of expression. And again, I don't want to say that everything about Russia is just terrible and bad. And I think what I would commend Tucker on is attempting to cover this black box of a country at all. But I will say that a lot of his report lies through omission, is the way I would characterize it. It's incomplete to the point of giving you a very skewed perspective of the place.
Well, that makes sense. I feel like when I listened to the interview between Tucker and Putin, I was like, first I was like, what am I listening to? Because it felt like Putin was doing this history
lesson from the 9th century onwards.
Was that accurate? Was any of that accurate?
Oh, no. He's a terrible student of history. As many history experts point out, he does not know his history, and he goes on these rants. The fact that Tucker managed to land an interview with Putin is great. It's the type of access that I could only dream about. Right. But he essentially used the entire interview, and maybe that was part of the deal. I don't know. But it was basically just a platform for Putin to indulge in a 3-hour written erroneous history lesson.
Yes. Okay. So you're from Russia. And I've always wondered, what the perspective is of the people in Russia. You obviously can speak freely about this because you live in the United States. But do people actually really like Putin the way that it's portrayed, or is it sort of mixed?
Every time that I go back home recently, these days, at least for the past couple of times, I try to talk to people in the streets about these very things. And it doesn't give you any sort of coherent idea of the entire population, but it anecdotally gives you a chance to sample the people that you like, passerbys, and kind of see what their opinions are. I will say that I have met people who genuinely will tell you that they support Putin and that the support for Putin is real. I'm willing to believe that to a certain extent that's true. Sure. Of course, there is a huge issue with measuring public opinion in Russia accurately, because there are no tools for independently gathering that type of information. People will not willingly tell you what they think when you call them from a survey. So there's a little bit of that. But with that caveat, I will say that, yes, I have met people who support Putin. Yeah. I am willing to believe that the support for Putin is real, and maybe even among a big chunk of the population. But then you have to ask yourself why that is. And one of the main reasons I would name is lack of independent media, the fact that the majority of the country still watches TV as their prime source of news, and 99% of what you see on TV is state-run propaganda. And I think that one way or another shapes your perception of reality and of your leader. So there's that. But I would imagine that among the younger population that is less inclined to watch TV and actually gets their news from online, Telegram and other sources, they would probably, the support for Putin among the younger population, is my hunch, would be much less so than among the older population who, want to make Russia great again and go back to the Soviet times.
Right.
I definitely felt that impulse last time I was in Russia a couple of months ago.
Because it was so great during the Soviet times.
They are now reinstating Stalin monuments. There's a new shiny Stalin monument that has just been returned to its original place in Moscow subway this past May. It's just, in the entire vibe, feels like the Iron Curtain is slowly coming back.
Really?
Kind of like the digital version of an Iron Curtain. Yes. Well, right now you can't use, for instance, YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter in Russia without VPN. Those are blocked. They are now slowing down WhatsApp. And they're trying, I think, to force everybody to switch to this government-run messenger they call Max, where the level of government surveillance is much higher. So all these things, it feels like Iron Curtain of 2025 is slowly upon us.
So I think that would then mean, well, you tell me, is Putin going to be done after Ukraine? Because that was a big question. And this is where I think a lot of people became attracted to what Tucker Carlson was saying in general about Russia and NATO, and the idea that we put nuclear facilities or put missiles at on the edge of the Russian border, and how NATO kind of violated its own terms and all of these things. Again, I have not there's so much said about all of these different wars and things happening. I don't even know if any of that's true, but this is just what he was saying. And that the reason that Putin invaded Ukraine was because he was sick of NATO encroaching on his border, and that he felt like he needed this land back or whatever, and that he was going to stop in Ukraine, and he wasn't going to move any further to the west. Although he just flew a bunch of drones a couple weeks ago into Poland. So what's true and what's false about?
Yeah, those arguments that you just mentioned of Tucker's, they are almost verbatim what somebody like my father would say, with whom we have vast disagreements. But I would say my father is a representative. He's back in Russia, and he's a representative of that hardline pro-Putin segment of society where... Really? Yeah, he is using all these arguments. It's the disappointment in the West. It's the feeling that NATO has betrayed Russia, that they have not treated Russia as an equal partner after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then they're expanded to the east. There's the double standards of Kosovo bombing that he always mentions. And these are all the set of grievances that have been percolating in the Russian society basically since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think for someone of my dad's generation, who remember their youth in the Soviet Union and kind of romanticizes the past for that reason. Kind of, he wants to get back to this mythical place when we had this great empire, this strong country that could show force, before the Cold War was over, basically. Right. So those are all, I would say, those are the grievances that people who support Putin would use as reasons for the invasion. I don't buy any of that. I think that this was a completely unprovoked invasion of a neighboring country that never posed any threat to Russia. And I think that Putin's calculation was that they could seize control of Kiev in 3 days, as they said during those early cabinet meetings in the Kremlin in the early days of the war. And then when that backfired, it was too late to back off. Although I think there were actual genuine negotiations taking place in April of 2022, a couple of months into the war in Istanbul. And that's where, accounts differ. Those were closed-door meetings, so we don't really know what happened. But according to the Russian state media, at least, and according to the experts, pro-Russian experts, they would tell you that's where Russians really tried to kind of back off, not realizing that the invasion has backfired. And that's where, Ukraine was like, no, we're going to go. We have strategic advantage right now. We want to get all of our territories back, which is not, I completely understand that impulse. Yes. But, arguably that was the moment where you could have potentially stopped the military action. Right now, it's really hard to say what the peace looks like, what the situation after the war looks like. It's hard to imagine for me what that would look like.
Right. Do you think that Trump is even close to
He's
creating
certainly
peace. Yeah.
He's certainly closer, I would say, than the Biden administration by far in terms of making progress on the peace deal. So I would say he's the last best hope for making some sort of peace negotiation work. I don't think what happened in Alaska carried any sort of meaning beyond geopolitics and photo op. I don't think that, so I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic.
Right.
Wars tend to end sooner rather than later. It's been over 3 years at this point. But at the same time, I don't see any specific or concrete goalposts or signs in the ether that this is nearing any sort of conclusion. And I don't know what that conclusion could look like even at this point, to be honest.
Right. No, that makes sense. I guess one thing that I've been curious about related to that war is just they're obviously talking about geography, taking land and things like that. But how much of this, because I can imagine from the Russian perspective, you're looking at the West right now and you're like, these people are nuts. Like, they don't know what gender is. They are, using lawfare against each other. The United States is like imploding. Two diametrically opposing worldviews, the conservative and liberal worldview that can't see eye to eye on anything. Now there's assassinations and assassination attempts. And obviously you had like France do their weird trans thing at the Olympics, which was like that was weird. And you're looking at that as a Russian, and the Russians are, Eastern Orthodox, and again, Protestant, I have my problems with Orthodox Christianity, regardless of whether or not it's in Russia. But they're looking at the West and they're probably thinking to themselves, what is wrong with these people? And why don't we just attack now? Why don't we try to go after them now? Because it looks like they're imploding and like they're not going to be able to do anything. And Europe is a disaster, and they're all paying Russia and China for their energy while they're going green. Anyways, like, are they thinking that way?
You were literally, that was Putin's calculation, verbatim, I would imagine.
It was a fantastic, not that I like Putin. I can't stand him. He's a dictator, but that was a good calculation. And it was
backfired.
Well, okay. All right. It did backfire, but
he miscalculated the extent to which the West still collectively can unite in a moment of threat, like one coming from Russia invading a neighboring country, I think.
You didn't think so? Did he calculate that the United States was going to give like $1 trillion, like $600 billion? That was where the miscalculation was. It was in the financial power. And I get that. But I don't think he miscalculated the social upheaval in the West. And I think that, a lot of the conservatives, and I have a hard time with this, were they got to a point where they're like, why do we keep giving money to Ukraine over the Biden administration when you've got some 20 million people coming through the southern border, and we've got all these issues at home? I didn't know what to think. Part of me is glad we did, if what you're saying is true, and if he was calculating that, because I don't think that Europe and NATO would have actually been able to do it alone. So I don't know. I can go both ways on this, but you're saying he did not calculate that the United States would give that much financial support.
Or he did not calculate that. He did not calculate the response of Vladimir Zelensky. Naturally, right. He imagined that was a lightweight who would take the first opportunity to run away. Right. And allegedly, according to reported anecdotes, he was offered early on a chance of evacuation by the Biden administration, and he refused it. I don't know whether that's part of a myth or a lore now, but right. But there's that. So he definitely miscalculated the actions of the West, of the U.S., and of Ukraine.
Right. What did you think of when Zelensky came to the White House and had his scuffle with J.D. Vance and Trump? Like, maybe I'm watching too much right-wing stuff, but I was just like, this guy's pissing me off. He like pissed me off. He came in and he was like kind of being demanding and rude. And I don't know if he had gotten some like intel from the Democrats and they were like, hey, you got to go tough on Trump or whatever. And
I think so. It's not just the Democrats. I think he maybe spoke to European leaders who I think right now find themselves very much in opposition to the Trump administration. Yeah. And so I think those were the two different versions of reality, because you can, for the past 3 years, Vladimir Zelensky has been living in the reality where he is a hero. He is on the covers of world magazines, and he is being greeted by every leader of Western Europe with such respect. And And then, so you kind of, when you operate within that reality, you become acquainted to a certain way of operating. And then you meet somebody like Trump, who already does not like Zelensky, who does not like Zelensky from his first term. When you remember, there was that phone call when he tried to pressure Zelensky I forget what was the scandal about. I think it was about pressuring Zelensky over Hunter Biden and his dealings with Burisma. And there was that phone call that was recorded. Anyway, they don't like each other, right? And so, yes, I think that Zelensky's visit to the White House, it was hard to watch. I think that Zelensky definitely miscalculated, and he did not behave like the leader of the country that has been receiving hundreds of millions of dollars from this country for their, aid of various types. That said, I think that the Trump's behavior and J.D. Vance's behavior was also beyond the pale. I think that nobody behaved like a leader of the country that they should represent at that meeting. It was just bad sense of miscommunication. If anything, what I took away from it in terms of lessons is, do not rely, you have to rely on translators when you have these high official meetings, because translators will not only ensure the sort of the specifics of what you're trying to convey and the tone, which I think Zelensky struggled with because his English is not the best. It's good, but it's they can smoothen some of the sharp corners when they translate things. But also, translation gives you a chance to pause and think and compose your thoughts. And I think the lack of that has really created a volatile situation in that White House cabinet meeting.
Yeah, that was crazy. I remember watching that. Would you categorize this war, at least for the last couple of years, especially during the Biden administration, between Russia and Ukraine, as kind of a proxy war, where it's the United States versus Russia? Ukraine's kind of in the middle there. That's
how Russians think about it. That's what state news are telling them every single day.
So I think they're at war with America,
with
basically.
NATO. Is how they're. Yeah, the term that Putin at least used to use was collective West, by which he means Europe led by the United States.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's how it's being characterized. We're not fighting Ukrainians, even though every day Ukrainians are dying, and Russia is decimating entire cities, leveling them to the ground, killing civilians, and these are Ukrainians, right? But I think it's almost a defense mechanism where you try to distance yourself from the consequences and the casualties on the ground by saying, no, we're not fighting our brothers in arms Ukrainians, we're fighting this abstract NATO, this dark force that has come too close to our borders, and we need to defend them.
So when you travel to Russia, you do a couple times a year. I watch one of your videos. You're just like man on the street talking to people or whatever. Some guy, I can't remember which video it was. Some dude like right out of the gate just started talking about Stalin, I think, or started. It was just like weird, and because Stalin's a bad guy in the United States. Well, he should be. Some people love Stalin.
No, I think the guy who was talking in my video was also kind of pointing out
he was saying it was
a bad guy, which was very brave of him, because we were standing right in front of the newly renovated Stalin monument in Moscow subway station, and there were a few sort of men in like black overalls circling that statue. It was hard to tell whether they were part of FSB or just some subway security. They didn't wear any identifying signs on them, but they were clearly there to monitor people in their interaction with this monument. So for this man to just, get out of nowhere, he saw us recording. I just had this idea of starting the video by that monument because it shocked me so much that they would reinstate it. It has just returned to its original location this past May. And so I wanted to see it for myself, and I wanted to film there for a bit. And so that man, he just walked from the rush hour crowd on the subway, and he felt so compelled to approach me and tell me that Stalin was a murderer. Even, where I think the threat was non-zero of something happening to him for that. But that thought that used to be so uncontroversial in Russia even a couple of years ago. That's one thing that, like, when I go back now in the last couple of years, that's one thing that I notice that strikes me as how quickly things changed in terms of, feeling fearful of saying things that used to be completely obvious even a couple of years ago, like the fact that Stalin was a murderer. This
Right.
revisionist history that has been slowly creeping in on the country from within, from state media and Putin's remarks, is palpable in those moments.
That's totally true, and it's not at that level, but it is happening in the United States. There's a group of the far right in the United States who is like, Hitler wasn't that bad,
Daryl Cooper,
and
Tucker Carlson guests often.
Right. Well, Nick Fuentes, I don't know how much he's into. That guy's a moron. And but it is weird because like 3 or 4 years ago, nobody on the right, I mean, the left would call Trump Hitler. And that was sort of like, okay, whatever. You guys have done that for 10 years.
Yeah.
Obviously that's not true, but whatever. And then you got people on the right who are now like, yeah, Jews are the problem with
Hitler's
everything.
not a bad guy.
Hitler was like onto something. Crazy. And then, and there's a lot of them, and that stuff has spread like wildfire.
Yeah.
And it is horrifying to see how quickly things like that can shift and change. Real quick, like you grew up in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So like why? So, okay. And your father seems to be more in favor of the Russian regime.
That's also a very recent development. I would say that
Really?
he has done an 180 in his ideological views over the past 30 years from, championing the democracy. He used to have an anti-government band back in the Soviet Union where he would go on stage and sing about, the bureaucracy and the lies of the Soviet Union. So he was the biggest proponent of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he traveled all over Europe and the United States the moment he could. And I think over the years, there was just this gradual disappointment and the feeling that the West has somehow betrayed Russia and that, like, we are not where we promised to be. There's all these grievances that are directed towards a whole host of external forces that somehow have, brought Russia from a promising young democracy in the 90s to a totalitarian dictatorship that it is today. And of course, the blame is often directed to these external forces. Right. And I think that's where my father is today.
What made you? How did you become like pro-West? I mean, it sounds like you kind of grew up in
I grew up in the family, and it sort of seeped into it. And I also come from a more sort of well-off family. So I had an opportunity to go to a private school in Moscow in the time when it was a flourishing democracy. A lot of my teachers were from the UK and the United States. A lot of my fellow graduates from high school ended up going to universities in Europe and the United States, and myself included. And so there was always this orientation towards the West. And it's hard to emphasize enough that how much things have changed quickly. The Russia I remember growing up in was very Western friendly, Western oriented. I don't know if you remember during Medvedev's 4 years in power, I think it was 2008 to 2012, when Putin briefly stepped down, at least pro forma, to obey the constitution that he then swiftly changed to get rid of term limits for himself, basically. But during the Medvedev years, I think Steve Jobs came to Russia. There's a famous photo of them together. It was a very open society. Things happened very quickly.
That's terrible. Yeah, that's horrible to hear. I didn't know. I mean, I'm 26, so I would have been like 8 years old during all of that. I like the history of Russia is very confusing. Like I don't know anything about it. The only thing that I know is based off of what Putin said to Tucker in that interview, which I was like, I
forget everything he said.
All that. So is your goal, like when you go over there, what's your goal in reporting over there? Is your goal to kind of bring back that democracy focused Russia, or is it just to tell the American people what's happening?
Well, all of that, it's
Right.
always been sort of a dream and a goal. When
Yes.
I came to the United States, it was never a plan to stay here forever. I always wanted to get good education, get a lot of experience, and then go back to Russia to, elevate journalism and video journalism back at home, because it's in dire situation right
Yeah.
now, especially. But with going back now and whatever reports I'm capable of getting, I think Russia has become such a black box. There's virtually no Western reporters that are left there that are reporting for any major media outlets. Whatever bureaus existed there, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, have closed with the start of the war.
Wow.
And you can hardly blame them, given the level of censorship and the level of real danger that you can get into, especially as a foreigner, when you say things like calling the war. Although right now it's a little bit more lax. But so I guess even I think the meta goal is just try to talk to real people on the streets and try to get anything out of that black box of Russia for the Western audience.
Are you on their radar or anything? Because the free press is massive. It's gotten huge over the last couple of years, I guess, since it started. And I can imagine, I don't know Putin and what he's doing, but you've got one of the bigger, up and coming media companies, news companies.
You would be surprised how few people know about it. I've yet to meet people in Russia who independently of me know what the free press is. I think it depends on what media you're consuming and which kind of bubbles do we all live in. I meet people who either are biggest fans of the free press, hate the free press, or have absolutely no idea what the free press is. And I think a lot of Russians fall into that third category. Whether I'm on the radar, it's hard to say. I'm doing everything in the open, and I would like to believe that gives me some sort of protection. I'm going around the city with a camera, literally stopping people on the street. There is close to zero chance that the authorities are completely unaware of my actions because of that. But that said, I have never had any problems so far. Knock on wood, and I've done a number of these reports at this point where nobody has even approached me on the streets of the city to ask what I'm doing.
Wow.
That's good. But does that? I don't know whether that's any good proxy for whether I'm actually being followed. I try not to think about those things, because then you become too paranoid to do your job.
Right. I mean, I think again, this is the news. This is what the news says. CBS offered, $200 million to buy out the free press. I can imagine that if that all goes through and you then are sort of with CBS, I can imagine that would kind of blow your cover a little bit, just because everybody knows CBS all over the world. It definitely helps that the free press. My parents, I tell my parents, I'm interviewing this person from the free press, and they're nobody, they're like, what is the free press? Because they're old, they're old or whatever. And it's I'm trying to explain they're a big deal, and they don't, or the Daily Wire. For a long time, people were just like, what's the Daily Wire? Who cares? Fox News, that's the conservative. No, well, now Daily Wire is huge, and I think the free press is getting to that level, it seems like. But that's man, that's why that the whole thing in Russia is. Have you been to Ukraine? Have you?
No, it's always been a dream. I'm a little bit worried about going there with my Russian passport, both in terms of how I would be treated in Ukraine, and also about the prospects of ever returning to Russia after that. I would probably be considered a traitor right away.
Wow.
So as much as I would love to go, I feel like maybe that's why I keep going to Russia instead. I feel like that's as close to the front lines as I can possibly get in some sort of responsible way without maximizing my chances of being detained.
And there's more acceptance of Western reporters going into Ukraine.
Right.
Feels like there's a lot of reporting happening there already. So it's good to have someone in Russia who has access.
Right.
That's good. Wow. Okay. We can move into the other story that we mentioned, but I think that's all very interesting. And the war, I mean, I remember, I think if I'm getting this right, my wife and I got married in 2022, and it was was it February of 2022?
Mm-hmm. So we were 2022. Yeah.
We were in Disney. We were at Disney. We were in Florida. We were on our honeymoon, and it's a month after we got married, and we're oh, Russia just invaded Ukraine. And then that things went berserk after that. And then it was a year later, right? 2023, October 2023, a year and a half later, Israel, right? And it felt, was that wrong or is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And it felt like we were sort of like, what is going on? I do think that had to do with the fact that Biden was president. And I think the world waits for a Democrat to become a president so that they can do whatever they want to do. And then when a Republican gets in, they stop or they calm down a little bit. You reported on this story, which was like very fascinating, about this Gazan boy. Yeah. And so I just want to, I guess, can you just explain what the story is, and then we can talk through it and just kind of give the full breakdown of what actually happened here?
Right. So it's important what the story is and who's telling it.
Mm-hmm.
It's being told by a former contractor, an American contractor with this organization called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an aid organization that's operating in Gaza, backed by Israel and the United States. And it's a mechanism that started relatively recently. In late May, they rolled out the 4 locations in Gaza where they distribute aid to civilians. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're doing that, according to them, it's the mechanism that replaced the previous UN mechanism of aid delivery. And according to GHF and according to many of the Israeli sources, and there's ample videos online to corroborate it, the problem with the UN mechanism was chiefly that it was infiltrated by Hamas quite a bit. When the UN trucks would enter Gaza, they would almost, in many cases, would almost immediately be overtaken by masked men, and the food would then be, and food right now and aid in general is the currency in Gaza. That's how Hamas operatives pay their people, because they're out of money, and who control those people. And there's also a real hunger. So those who control food and supplies are those who virtually stay in power. So that's the reason for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation operation. And so there's this former contractor named Anthony Aguilar, who in late July went on a small live-streamed Zoom call. And towards the end of an hour-long conversation, he drops this bombshell of a story about how during his time at the GHF in late May, during patrolling one of the sites towards the end of a day of distribution aid, a young boy comes up to him. He kisses his hand. He thanks him for the food. Then he leaves. And a few moments later, he gets gunned down by the IDF, shot and killed. And that story, so Tony Aguilar tells that story. And GHF has been mired in controversy basically since the beginning of the operations, that, there have been shots fired at some of these sites, which I fully believe that there were a lot of operational failures, especially early on, because when you think about this hastily rolled out operation to try to feed people in a hostile country that you are at war with, I would imagine that there would be a lot of difficulties with that. But that story, that bombshell of a story about the killed boy by the IDF changed everything. It was a bombshell.
It was I feel like it was everywhere. It was on every news station. It was on social media. Everybody was like, IDF murdering children.
Right? It's the emotional resonance of the fact that it is a young boy. There are photos of him, and like these, IDF soldiers gunning him down. So the story,
because they're cruel, horrible monsters who just want to kill people.
That's the implication of it all, right?
That was essentially, and it was not. It was the fascinating thing is that it was not on the left obviously pushed it. CNN, MSNBC, all those big stations. But again, you had Tucker Carlson, Candace.
It's a horseshoe, Andy.
Right.
That horseshoe theory, right? Where far left and the far right actually converge at some point.
They're going to converge. I've said this a million times. They're going to converge over their hatred for the Jews. I mean, that's the only thing that they agree on, is that they hate the Jews and they think the Jews are ruining everything in society. And it's horrifying because somebody like Candace Owens, even with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, now her new theory I just saw in X, an hour or two ago was that the Jews had underground tunnels and they shot him from under. It's the dumbest. I've said, like, I don't think Candace Owens is illiterate. I don't know if she can read. I don't know like where this stuff is coming from. But the idea that they dug tunnels beneath Charlie Kirk and killed him.
It's wild. She has no shortage of wild ideas. My favorite conspiracy theories of her is still the Bridget Macron being a man conspiracy.
Michael Knowles said today, he said, for like the sake of all of our eyes, just drop the case. Nobody wants to see those pictures. Nobody wants to, let's just be done with it. We believe you. You're a woman. Let's just drop it. That's the worst thing that could possibly come out.
I don't think anything can convince Candace at this point. No amount of evidence will change minds. And I think that's the really true of the moment that we live in.
Yes.
No amount of evidence. And I think, going back to Tony Aguilar's story, it slowly unraveled, I think, over the course of a month and a half. But there were all these evidence and breadcrumbs along the way, all these discrepancies between what he said and the evidence that was emerging. GHF posted a video from body cam footage from the interaction that Aguilar had with the boy. There were discrepancies between how he described the moment and what the footage actually showed. That became clear pretty quickly, but that did not matter. That's the thing that I find fascinating about this story, because even as it began falling apart, as GHF began, publishing all this evidence, the media basically stuck with Aguilar, and he continued his press tour all through early September, when on September 4th, it was announced that the boy he claimed he saw shot was actually found alive.
Right.
And even that didn't stop Aguilar, because he went, a couple of days later, he went on a show called Breaking Points, and he basically denied the fact that this is the same.
He said it was a different kid. It was like, I saw the picture.
It's a post-truth moment where people will just believe in the narratives that they want to believe in, that fit with their worldview, and no amount of direct evidence will change their mind about it.
So that guy, Tony is his name?
Tony Aguilar.
He should have an Oscar, obviously, because he's an actor and everything he said was not true. But like, do you think he lied, or do you think he actually thought what he said? I think he lied.
That's a very interesting question, and I've watched maybe all of the interviews that he's done at this point. So I really I tried to figure out what happened there. What's interesting is that the podcast where he told that story for the first time in late July, this small podcast, was not the first place that interviewed him. He first came on the media circuit a couple of days earlier when BBC had a sit-down interview with a former GHF contractor, Tony Aguilar, where he talked about the IDF's war crimes more broadly, but he did not bring up this story. And he only really, for the first time he tells this story, is on this small podcast towards the end of an hour-long conversation. So the way, if you watch it, it's kind of meandering, and he's rambling a little bit, and then he's like, and then he was shot. So it feels to me that it was maybe a spur of the moment type of thing, where he just embellished a little bit. And he just, there are moments where you blurt something out and then you feel like you should stick with it. And so,
but
so I don't think he meant
a little kid was shot. That's crazy. I feel like if I'm going to kind of slip up or just kind of blow something out of proportion, it's not going to be that a little 9-year-old was shot.
You have to remember that his whole shtick was talking, going around and talking about the IDF's war crimes. So when you spend an hour talking in vague terms about all the bad things that Israel is doing, then your mind could naturally travel to a kid being shot. It's not that huge of a leap.
Yeah. So
I think he blurted it out, and then he felt like he could stuck with it because there was no possible way to corroborate it in the middle of war-torn Gaza. But then there were, actually.
Do you, obviously, I mean, the videos, post-truth interviews, he kept doubling down on this, saying, no, it's a different kid. Even though the pictures were obviously the same. Why? And I think, I don't fully understand this, but it feels a lot like the Russian thing with the Russian hoax with Trump.
Russiagate, yeah.
Just almost feels like every single major story that's come out Hunter Biden's laptop, like all of these stories that have been run by the left. And then when it's comes time to actually figure out what the truth is, they just double down, triple down on what they had said before that they know is an actual objective lie.
Right.
And like, what are you supposed to do about that? And I know that you're not in charge of the entire world, but
what are you supposed to do about it is a great question. I sent diligently requests for comment before my story was due to be published.
Yes.
Requests for comment for all of these publications. Very few got back to me. MSNBC, to their credit, quietly took down their explosive story featuring Tanya Aguilar from early August. They have not responded to my request for comment, but at least you cannot find that headline anymore. Whereas Tucker still has both of Tony Aguilar's interviews. He interviewed him twice within a single week. He invited him back again on his show within a single week to clear some of the first allegations that began boiling when GHF started releasing proof that showed some discrepancies within his testimony. So Tucker Carlson still has both of those interviews up. At least MSNBC, I wouldn't say that they're very honest about their response to this because they have not responded to my very numerous requests for comment, but at least you cannot find that headline on their website anymore. Yeah. Beyond that, what can you do as a journalist? You can do things like this. I will take victories where I can. The fact that story no longer exists, warms my heart a little bit.
Right. No, I thought that the reporting was very good, and I was happy because I've received text messages from people, just random people, family members, who are like, "Well, I can't keep supporting Israel. They're murdering children," and these like actually have real life effects on how people think about the war, and it's horrifying to think that somebody could basically fabricate a story or embellish a story, and then get put on this cycle, on this news cycle, and all these massive outlets, and push a completely false narrative that he probably knew was a false narrative. He most likely knew that it was a false narrative. And then it comes out that it's not true. And all of those stations say nothing. Tucker Carlson says nothing. I feel like a lot of Candace Owens's ideology surrounding the Jews was a lot of that story was like a nuclear bomb for those people, because for them, it felt like it totally validified everything that they had said about the Jews prior to.
And that damage has been done, and it's real. Right. And that has, you can't roll that back. And I think that's where media organizations' responsibility comes in terms of verifying your guest speakers before you put them on.
So, serious question. Is it the media's responsibility, or you have the situation with Jimmy Kimmel last week or so where he just lied about Charlie Kirk, gets pulled off of ABC for 3 days, which is so lame, and then gets put back on, and FCC pressure. There's questions of whether or not it was like pressure from the FCC, or was it his ratings suck because they do suck, and okay. We get to a point in society with news right now where there are so many different narratives. People know that they're lying and they're still pushing it. They hate their opponent, whatever. Yeah. Do we need, again, I'm like a conservative. I don't love government getting involved in everything, but do you have to, at some point, I feel like the government needs to get involved and just be like, look, we got to shut you down. You're spewing propaganda, and you have way too much power over the influence over the American.
Andy, you got to be careful what you wish for, because
I know.
When the government starts controlling things, you very quickly slide into modern day Russia, where everything gets controlled. I would err on the side of First Amendment rights to everybody. And as much as Jimmy Kimmel's remarks were completely off-colored, and they show you just how siloed we are in our echo chambers, because I'm telling you, I'm 1,000,000% certain that his entire writer room completely believed that Charlie Kirk's assassin, Tyler Robinson, was part of MAGA, because that was what immediate narrative on the left emerged very quickly and was pushed very hard, and before the suspect was even in custody.
Right.
So that was terrible. But at the same time, I don't think that FCC should be busying itself with fact-checking comedians. He's not even, even though he does possess perhaps, a large audience, although we can argue about the size of it. Apparently his ratings were not that great. But the last thing you would want is the government putting a thumb on the scale and fact-checking comedians, because, no matter how terrible or wrong what they say is
Mhm.
you do not want to end up in a situation where government is kind of making those decisions, because
This
it
is
has a chilling effect on speech very quickly.
It is interesting. One, I think you're much more generous than I am calling him a comedian. But
I don't like him personally.
no, I know nobody does. So this is an interesting thing because you have people on the political right who are influenced by, like, I don't know if you've heard of post-liberalism or Patrick Deneen and his book, Why Liberalism Failed, which, by the way, I think is a phenomenal book. And I've interviewed Patrick Deneen, and I think he is very smart, and he's heavily influential. J.D. Vance is influenced by him, and so is Pete Hegseth. And so that sort of world of post-liberalism, the idea that liberalism in its negative form, the idea that everybody can do whatever they want with whomever they want, however they want, with no restraint, has failed. Like, I think he makes a good point. I think he makes a valid point. And feel like, him and the post-liberals, guys like Michael Knowles, they like to use the shifting powers to kind of impose their will on the people. So the FCC shutting down Kimmel, they see that as a positive because obviously the left was doing stuff like that a couple of years back, especially over COVID, which again is like, there's a lot of
don't make it right, Andy.
No, look, I don't know if two wrongs. I don't think two wrongs. Well, here's the difference though. Let me give you the difference. Here's the difference. When it was happening during COVID, the government was actually just objectively lying. Like, they were actually just lying. They were. So I was part of a political campaign in 2022. A guy named Dr. Scott Jensen ran to be the governor of Minnesota, Republican. Obviously lost. Minnesota's pretty bad. And he basically had received a letter from the Minnesota Department of Health saying, you should count if somebody dies and they have COVID in their system, even if it's like in a car accident, put COVID as the primary cause of death, the secondary cause of death, which conflates the statistics and kind of ruins our chances of knowing actually what happened during COVID. And he was one of like 3 doctors in the country, or 4 or 5 doctors in the country, that were like, I'm actually not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth. And then they investigated his license like 5 times, and it's a disaster and whatever. But it ended up being that he told the truth, and all of the news and media, even like the New York Times, came around to that. Like a year ago, they're all writing these like cover up stories like, oh yeah, I guess masks weren't actually effective. And it's like, well, we knew that during 2020. So the difference that the conservatives would argue is they would say, yeah, well, the left like was actually lying objectively, and they knew what the truth was, but they chose to push the lie, which is what Obama did with the Russia hoax in his emails, if that's all legitimate. And he pushed that to the media, and he knew it was a fake story, and yet that went on for a long time. Whereas in this case, the FCC is protecting the truth, is what they would argue, and you should. And so it's different in that sense. Now,
my point is that the government has no place in protecting the truth either way. I don't think it's one of the functions of the government. And the moment the government decides that it is function, then you have very quickly government overreach that, again, has an enormously chilling effect on speech. But I do see and I appreciate that difference. I'm saying that the outcome should nonetheless be erring on the side of non-interference in speech.
So how do you think we fix this problem? I don't disagree with you in principle. I really don't want the government involved in like policing everybody's speech. It's obviously you're going to move into authoritarianism quick because people do bad things and whatever. And leadership power corrupts people in a lot of ways. But I was talking to Robert P. George. I don't know if you know who he is, from Princeton. He's like a big conservative thinker. And he made an interesting point. He said after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, he said in the United States, there's no longer a disagreement on like the means to a shared ends. On Republican and Democrat, there's now a disagreement on the ends. And so like, what is the purpose of the country? What's the purpose of human beings? What is it? What is a human being? The ends are completely different. And so it's not just like, hey, we need bigger government to get a better economy, and we need smaller. No, we don't have shared goals anymore. And he made the point that the last time things were this diametrically opposed in the country was prior to the Civil War. And again, I don't think he does not want civil war. Nobody wants civil war, but just making that sort of connection.
How do we lower the temperature, right?
Well, what do? I mean, literally people in the country think that you can change your gender. I live around a bunch of them. And it's hard to have conversations because you're like, well, like, what's the basis? What's our basis of conversation? And the political rights argument is you restore order through government by saying you can't say this, you can say this. Your argument, which I think is totally legitimate, is I grew up in Russia. They control the narrative.
Consider what that would do, what government response would do to people who disagree, to people on the left. Do you think that they would come around to this, or they would consider this as yet another dire sign of fascism in this country?
Well, what's going to happen anyways, though? Because even after Charlie Kirk has gotten assassinated, they're doubling down on that. A lot of people on the left. So what's
the solution? Well,
fix the problems in America.
The truth is, I think the answers are prosaic to a certain extent, and it's simply finding return to the common ground. I would like to believe, and maybe that's too optimistic, that we as Americans actually share a lot of things in common to a larger degree than we see on social media, because algorithms do tend to send you the craziest stuff
and bots
on you, and the most polarizing stuff. And I think that does not represent reality. And the cure to that is actually talking to people on the streets. And what Charlie Kirk was doing, actually going and talking, that's the only thing we can do. That's the only thing that, finding back to reality and finding back to our common human decency is what we can all hope for. And us as journalists and media figures have a large role to play in that.
Yeah. You're looking into this stuff probably way more than I am, especially the story with this boy in Gaza and just how that circulated so quickly and affected so many people. I'm interested in what your perspective is on what the attraction is from so many people to the conspiracy that the Jews are running everything and we need to support. I mean, it's gained traction on the right and the left. Obviously, the UK has just announced their recognition as Palestine, as a state of Palestine. Canada, Australia, I think I just saw. And what's the attraction? Why are people obsessed with this, and why do they hate the Jews so much?
Well, the Jewish conspiracy is one of the most ancient conspiracies, right? It dates back centuries. We go to the Protocols of Zion, which was the work of fiction by the Russians at the beginning of the last century. Why the Jews? I forget who was it who said that, if it wasn't Jews, that would be some other marginalized group. You just need to blame somebody. And Jews just happen to be one of those groups which are very easy to blame for the world's woes. I think it goes to the fundamental questions about why do we tend to believe in conspiracy theories. We like some overarching big theories that help explain a lot of the unexplainable around us. Whether it's what's the fascination with Jews, I don't know if I have a good answer beyond the fact that that has been historically the case. It just happens to be the group that a lot of people like to blame for a lot of things. Sure.
I'll tell you what I think. You tell me if this is crazy. But obviously the Jews are. So I'm a Christian, so obviously I'm coming from that perspective. I think Jesus was a human being.
I'm also not Jewish, by the way, so I don't know if I'm making the best case for.
No, I'm a Irish Midwestern. I don't know, so I'm Christian. So you have Jesus is ethnically Jew. He comes down. We believe all that stuff, and he dies on the cross, rises from the dead. He, opposes the Jewish authorities. He opposes the political authorities of his time, Pontius Pilate and the Romans and the Jewish leaders, and they kill him and whatever. And then he goes and he raises from the dead, and then he ascends into heaven. And so my take has always been that the reason why the people hate the Jews is, one, because they are God's chosen people, regardless of what people want to say. That is the historical fact. And even if you don't believe in the Bible, that they've believed that for as long as history has been recorded, that they are God's chosen people. And there have been things that have happened with the Jewish people throughout history that I think would support that. Aside from that, I think it has to do with the fact that Jesus was a Jew, and he and he's God, and he's ethnically a Jew up in heaven right now. And I think that people in their sin nature, again, we're getting into theological topics.
No,
but
I totally buy that. And I would add to that, you know, a lot of, you see a lot of Jewish people in positions of power, and it's a relatively small number of people in the world who, a lot of them occupy a position of power disproportionately.
Barry Weiss and Ben Shapiro.
Barry Weiss and Ben Shapiro are pulling the strings behind the scenes.
That's what people think, though. I mean, people. I think the Daily Wire took a massive hit in the last couple of years because of the conspiracy theories, especially with Candace Owens leaving, and it was. I like don't even know how to describe it yet, and I feel like it's going to take a while to recover or figure out what exactly happened, because there's also all these theories about like the bots on the internet. Like, has a lot of this just been sort of conjured up by fake bots and things like that, and then people like think that stuff's going viral, and it's social contagion sort of thing happening, and then everybody believes in it, and the algorithm is pushing it for certain people too who are more predisposed to that ideology. Right. It's like weird. Like what's happening is weird. But anyways, I just think that it's like, because Jesus is a Jew, and the Jewish people share his ethnicity, even though most Jews are not Christians, they share the ethnicity. And so, you know, I think that people want to get rid of Christianity and they want to get rid of Jesus. Yeah. And so the best way to do that in a physical, material sense is to get rid of the people who share his ethnicity. Yeah. And if you get rid of that, then you don't have to deal with them anymore. And you can out of sight, out of mind, because we live in a highly materialistic culture. But I don't know. I mean, also they're rich, and people are envious.
Rich and powerful. Right. You gotta wonder how that happened. It can't be through the faculties or cognitive, reasoning.
Right. It can't be because they work hard. So basically, going forward, I just want to know, like, what you think. Is there going to be an end to this?
I would like to believe that. If anything, you know, you mentioned Ben Shapiro and how he took a big fall in the last couple of years. One of the hopeful trends that I've seen recently is he actually went on Ezra Klein's show a couple of days before the Charlie Kirk assassination. I think the conversation would have been probably even more potent had it happened afterwards. But also, perhaps, I kind of enjoy the fact that it happened before, because then you are not affected by this incredible, horrific tragedy that just happened, and you can talk a little bit more freely. And that's the type of conversations that I would like to see happening more often, where people with ideological differences come together and discuss them like adults at the table. That's a hopeful trend, and I think that I would like to believe that we're going to see more of that. I would like to believe that the reality of social media algorithms is not representative of a physical reality, and I would like to believe that again, Americans have a lot more in common than they suspect, or that the algorithms are showing them online.
I totally agree. I hope that that's the case. I hope that people stop going on social media in general.
Exactly. Just purge that. Go it's detox.
It's so hard not to get totally sucked in to X for me. It's like, I want to argue with everybody. I want to just fight with everybody when I'm on there. And it sucks your life away. And you're like, wait a second.
Resist that urge.
Right. It's hard.
Go touch the grass.
Right. Go touch the grass. Yeah. Are you working on anything else related to Israel and anything like that right now? Always something related to Israel. And do you think the war is going to end soon or no? I mean, there's always going to be conflict in the Middle East.
There's always going to be conflict. I don't think we're going to solve Middle Eastern conflict anytime soon. But I would like to see a ceasefire soon. If anything, like, I am more hopeful and optimistic of some sort of practical steps towards ceasefire in the Middle East than I am in Russia, Ukraine, which tells you about the hopelessness I feel about my home country and their prospect of peace in the coming time.
You don't. I was just going to ask that. So you don't.
I am terminally optimistic, but I don't know if that reflects reality. Right. So I would like to see the war end this year, because it's been going on again for more than 3 years at this point. But at this point, I do not see any signposts or any signs in the ether that point towards the resolution of this conflict.
Do you see it escalating? Do you see anybody else getting involved in it? Do you see it?
Well, Russia has apparently provoked Poland a couple of weeks ago, was it? When they just randomly sent some drones to kind of poke them in the annoying way that President Putin is very capable of doing, of just provoking. It's just a cheap provocation to see what else is possible. I would hate to see, but I'm also like, you know, the last thing I want to do is make any sort of speculation about the future. If anything, history shows that when it comes to Russia, regime changes happen within 3 days, literally. Whether we're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union or the collapse of the Tsarist regimes in the beginning of the past century, it all happened within 3 days. It happens like that, and nobody predicts it.
Right.
So I don't want to make any speculation. I want to take it one day at a time, and all I can do is hope for speedy resolution of this senseless tragedy of a conflict.
I'll ask one more question. Do you think that a Republican or a Democrat, like, do you have a preference for what type of government you want to see going forward in the United States to help geopolitically? I feel like I'm biased, but I feel like there's an easy answer. But like, do you see the Democrats changing their approach to geopolitics as things go forward? I feel like they've been pretty.
I would like to believe that like there's got to be a wake up call at some point. I think the Democrats struggle with message right now, with messaging and with leadership. I think they have a real crisis of leadership. I think that the establishment model of elections that has been so far electing these gerontocrats is no longer working. I think Democrats have a lot of young talent that's being kept at bay for whatever reason. I don't know. I would like to see some. I think for the healthy functioning of this country, we need two strong parties that can offer some ideas. I don't think it's going to be a solution of a single party. So I think they keep themselves in check, keep each other in check by being strong. But again, for that, we need first and foremost real conversation going and real dialogue happening where people are not just screaming past each other and use their talking points as weapons. We need some real conversation happening between the two sides.
I agree with that. No, that's good. That's helpful. Well, thanks for doing this. I mean, I feel like your reporting and the free press in general, it's hard to find people and reporters that you can read and feel like they're not trying to make you vote for somebody and like everything that they're doing. And so I actually really appreciate what the free press is doing. And there's a couple other places out there that are really good as well. But when I watched that video, I was like, this is because I was like texting with my brother who was like, it's not looking good in Israel right now. That they seem like they're, yada, yada. And he was kind of listening to, I think, Candace or maybe Tucker. And I was like, dude, please, for the love of God, stop. And I sent him your video. And I don't know, I'll have to ask him what he thinks, but I was just like, this is not good. This is not good that those things are pushed so easily and so quickly and so many people jump on them and it works perfectly with the narrative. And I think that's a strategy of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of all of these terrorist organizations. They know that the Americans are emotionally driven and don't care about the facts as much as we probably should. And it's an easy way to garner support.
Absolutely. And Hamas knows that they cannot possibly win the ground war. They do not have the capacity to win the ground war physically, but they have the capacity and they have been winning information war by far, aided and abetted by Western media in many cases. Well, I appreciate you for having me on, Andy, and for giving platform to so many voices from our publication too. Thank you for being an avid reader and for very riveting conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.